250 miles above Earth. The first system every Space Shuttle astronaut had to activate after launch wasn't the science equipment or the cargo doors, it was the toilet. Weightlessness does something strange to your body, and within 2 hours of leaving the ground, you really need to go. That was just the first surprise. For the next 2 weeks, 6 or 7 adults would have to eat, sleep, work, and try to stay sane inside a vehicle the size of a small bus, with no shower, no privacy, and a sunrise every 90 minutes. Crews ran on Greenwich Mean Time, not because the UK ran the program, but because the shuttle circled Earth roughly every 90 minutes. That meant the crew saw 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every single day. If you tried to follow the sun, your body would never know whether to sleep or work. So Mission Control picked a time zone halfway between Houston and Moscow, and everyone agreed it was morning when the clock said so. The workday ran from 6 in the morning to about 9:30 at night. 3 meals, 2.5 hours of mandatory exercise, and the rest of the time scheduled down to the minute. Mike Mullane, who flew 3 shuttle missions starting in 1984, put it bluntly: every hour was planned. And in microgravity, every task took roughly 4 times longer than it would on Earth. Let's start with food.
So we do have a variety of different kinds of food aboard the International Space Station.
About 8 months before launch, every astronaut sat down with NASA nutritionists and tasted their way through dozens of options. They scored each item on a 1 to 9 scale, and anything below a 6 didn't make the cut. The shuttle menu eventually offered more than 70 food items and 20 different beverages. But space changes the way food tastes. Without gravity pulling fluids down, astronauts' faces puff up, their sinuses fill, and their sense of smell takes a hit. Everything tastes blander, so they craved bold, spicy flavors. Shrimp cocktail became famous as the most requested item on orbit because the cocktail sauce was sharp enough to cut through dulled taste buds. There was no fridge on the shuttle, and no freezer either. Most meals were freeze-dried packets that astronauts rehydrated with a water needle plugged into a small port. The water itself came from the shuttle's fuel cells, which combined hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity and gave drinking water as a byproduct. Heating took 20 to 30 minutes. The whole meal, start to finish, ate up about an hour.
These are the tortillas. They're very popular on orbit.
Tortillas were the bread of choice. Why? Because regular breadcrumbs would float through the cabin and end up in someone's eye, or worse, inside electronics. For the same reason, salt and pepper came as liquids in tiny squeeze bottles. Granular pepper in 0G would have been a nightmare. Sleep was harder than eating, and not because the work was tiring. The shuttle didn't have private cabins like the International Space Station. There were 4 bunks in the mid-deck, stacked in a 2-tier setup, with 1 flipped vertical, because in zero gravity, there's no real difference between sleeping sideways or upside down. Anyone who didn't get a bunk just strapped a sleeping bag to the wall, the floor, or the ceiling. But strapping yourself in was the easy part. The hard part was the noise. Spacecraft are surprisingly loud. Fans, pumps, instruments, all running constantly. Then there's the sun, slicing through the window shades every 45 minutes. So astronauts wore earplugs and eye masks just to get any rest. Scott Kelly described velcroing his head to a cushion so it felt vaguely like a pillow. There was one other problem. In microgravity, the carbon dioxide you exhale doesn't drift away. It pools around your head in an invisible bubble. Sleep through that, and you wake up with a headache and a foggy brain. So everyone slept near an air vent, which kept the CO2 moving. NASA scheduled 8.5 hours of sleep per night. Most astronauts got about 6. They were too wired, too excited, too busy, and every morning Mission Control woke them up by piping a song into the cabin. Danger Zone from Top Gun was a favorite. Andrea Bocelli also made the rotation. Imagine being woken up at 6 a.m. by Kenny Loggins, 250 miles above the planet. We dig into stories like this every week. If that sounds good, subscribe. Then there was the work. Most shuttle missions had one big job: deploying a satellite like Hubble, repairing it, bringing supplies to the space station, running experiments. The first 2 or 3 days were usually the most intense, especially for satellite missions, because the payload had to get out of the cargo bay early. Spacewalks, called EVAs, were the most demanding work of all. A single hour outside the shuttle required about 7 hours of underwater training back in Houston in a 6 million gallon pool with a full-scale mock-up of the spacecraft. Before stepping into the vacuum, an astronaut spent roughly 24 hours decompressing, just like a scuba diver returning from depth. The suit weighed around 280 pounds on Earth, life support backpack included.
Cardiovascularly intense workout.
And then there was exercise, 2.5 hours every day. Not because anyone enjoyed it, but because in weightlessness, your bones lose density and your muscles forget how to work. Skip the workouts, and you'd come back to Earth too weak to stand. Through all of it, the small annoyances added up. Mullane said one of the worst parts was simply finding things. Every tool, every food packet, every notebook was attached to a wall with Velcro. And the wall could be any wall, ceiling, or floor, because nothing has a down in space. Half the workday felt like a scavenger hunt. The bathroom, officially called the Waste Collection System, was essentially a high-tech vacuum cleaner that took years and a fortune to design. There was no shower at all. Crews washed with damp sponges and rinseless soap. By the end of a 2-week mission, the cabin smelled like exactly what you'd expect from 7 people living without showers for 14 days. But ask any astronaut what they remember, and it's none of those things. It's the view. Astronaut Tom Jones used to float to the small hatch window beside the toilet, draw the curtain behind him, and stare into the cosmos while he did his business. He said the universe out there made up for everything. The strangest part of coming home was the bed. After 2 weeks of sleeping strapped to a wall, plenty of astronauts reported lying down on Earth and feeling, for a few nights, like they were still floating above the mattress. Their bodies hadn't yet remembered which way was down. So that's what life inside a shuttle actually looked like. Velcro, freeze-dried shrimp cocktail, sleep masks, and a workday scheduled to the minute. They weren't tourists up there. Everything that should have been simple became hard, and a sunrise every 90 minutes was just the background. YouTube's already picked your next one. It's on screen if you're not done yet.